I'm Anya.
And I'm Maddie.
And we're the Tweeks,
Twin Teen Geeks. The March series is about Congressman John Lewis's story and the whole campaign for desegregation. This graphic novel was inspired by a comic book called Martin Luther King and the Montgomery Strike, which recounted a bunch of his exploits as a political activist. It inspired John Lewis and a bunch of his other student friends to do nonviolent protests such as sit-ins.
It's appropriate that we are reviewing these books right now because we are filming this actually on Martin Luther King Day, so it's very nice. We like the day off of school, but it's also a great day to remember what he did for our country. As well as recently this past weekend, President-elect Donald Trump has kind of been doing some tweeting about John Lewis.
Which was decidedly not cool.
Donald Trump's tweets were wrong and not very presidential. He's incredibly overrated. It wasn't very nice at all. So the first book is about a backstory of John Lewis's life and kind of what he went through as a kid and what inspired him to be the person that he is.
It's just really nice, like, seeing how a politician such as him started getting into politics. I've always thought, like, in my head, I don't know why I've always been like, oh yeah, politicians were always like, yeah, I'm gonna be a politician, like, I'm gonna be president. It was just like, whoa, he didn't start out wanting to be a politician, he wanted to be a preacher.
His story was just so incredibly inspiring, and just from a very young age, he always felt so passionately and strongly about civil rights. Even when a lot of his family member and people in his community told him that he should be quiet and that he shouldn't think these things because he's just going to cause trouble, he thought them anyway, and he still fought for what he believed in. It's very inspiring. Maddie actually read the book first, and after I picked it up and she told me the book is life-changing.
Honestly, it is. It honestly changed how I thought about a lot of things, not necessarily majorly, but just subtle things, like how people work.
I myself have always felt very strongly about equal rights and equality, and so it was really nice to read this because it went over things that I learned about in school. Like, we learned about the lunch counter sit-ins years ago,
but
and
they didn't really go into depth about it, which is such a shame.
Hearing it from his perspective, someone who actually was doing these sit-ins, it's very inspiring. So John Lewis grew up in a very small farm town in Alabama in the 50s. He kind of grew up at a time and a place where people were quite racist. As a young boy, he wasn't really interested in politics or school. He actually really liked chickens, and throughout the story it goes into his backstory and his life, and it talks about how he raised chickens. And even though that may seem like it has nothing to do with politics, there's a strong connection, because in the book multiple times it talks about how much he cared about these chickens. It really makes us see that he's cared about living things, and he just thinks everything should be equal, and he's thought so since he was very young. And when he started going to school, he was so passionate about school and learning.
And it talked about how during farming seasons his parents would try to make him stay home from school because they couldn't afford for them not to have that extra hand helping out at the farm. So what he would do is he would hide underneath the porch until the school bus came, and he would jump on the bus and go to school.
It's so inspiring how much he wanted to learn and how often we take school for granted.
Yeah, I've had my fair share of complaints about, oh, I don't want to get up and go to school, but he chose to do this, and I just think, like, wow, we're so lucky. I love learning, like, it's a thing, like, I love learning, and if someone's like, can't do that anymore, I would be like.
In 1951, John Lewis took his first trip up north with his uncle, and he recounts in the book how when he went up to New York, he was able to learn about how life is like when things aren't so segregated. He drove through many states that were not accepting of his race. He says things about Tennessee and Kentucky and how him and his uncle driving through were very, very cautious and nervous because they didn't know what was going to happen. But once they got to Ohio, they calmed down and were less tense because they knew they were going to a place that accepted them. So as he got older, he started getting more involved with civil rights, and when he was a teenager, he heard Martin Luther King Jr., who was just a preacher at the time, speak on the radio, and he was really inspired. He decided to go to college, and he wrote to Martin Luther King Jr., and he actually met him, and because of his encounters with Martin Luther King Jr., he talked about how he wanted peaceful protests to fight for what they both believed in. He joined the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which was the committee that did the first nonviolent protests at the lunch counters. In the book, he talks about how in early meetings they tried to dehumanize each other by calling each other like mean names, pushing each other with racial slurs, and they really had to train for a long time to always be calm and to never be violent. And they started doing more and more of these protests. Now, these people were cruel. They would throw drinks and try and push them off the tables and counters, and they would yell these awful things to them, but they had to stay calm and they just had to sit there. People were arrested multiple times, and he says in the book that the fine at first to bail them out was $100, but then they
all started singing,
and
they all just got so sick of them.
The price actually went down just to $5 because they wanted them out of there.
So the mayor of the town, they all marched to City Hall, and he says he stopped segregation 7 years ago at the airport when he first stepped into office, which is not true.
Also, that kind of reminds me of current events today when a lot of people say that racism isn't a thing.
And then he also told them that he would recommend that they desegregate the lunch counters, but he couldn't do anything because it was the store owner's policy.
So the book is really, really amazing. As a middle-class, white, suburban teen in California, it's pretty hard for me to imagine what people of color and different races are going through right now, and even what they were going through back then when it was just so much worse.
This book, it really makes you think that we have come a long way since the 50s, but there's still
so much more work to do.
So much more work. And we will continue to work till everyone's equal.
So, John Lewis,
we love your book, and we love you, John Lewis.
So that's all for now. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Tumblr, Periscope, Snapchat, Facebook. Yeah.
Subscribe to us on YouTube.
And check back every Thursday on comicmix.com for new videos.
Bye!